Right. I believe we're live. Let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another class of the PokerMate Simple Week. Very excited to be here with you guys once again. I want to thank you all for being here and for separating this time in your schedule. I really appreciate that. I feel honored to be able to be here and try to contribute with some value, some content, some knowledge to you guys. Can everyone hear me well? Please let me know in the chat. And then we're going to begin our second class of the PokerMate Simple Week on how EV is maximized. Someone said that the screen is black. Can someone confirm that? The screen is black? Is the screen black for everyone? Please give me some confirmation in the chat about this. No, screen is fine. Okay, good. Awesome. So we are about to begin, and this, how EV is maximized, is the question that follows from the topic that we talked about last week. We talked about how EV is generated, and we discussed a bunch of very important theoretical concepts that help us understand how we can generate EV. We saw how our edge is the difference between our opponent's mistakes and our mistakes, and how, in theory, if you're playing against competent opponents, you're very often required to hide information, because by not hiding information, you get exploited. And then the question that follows is, how can we actually maximize EV? Because theory and practice are different things. So that's the question we're going to try to answer today, how EV is maximized. So it's 3 p.m. o'clock, so let's begin. So before we jump straight into the before we jump straight into the concepts of today, let's just do a quick recap of what we saw last week. If you were not here in last class, the first class of the PokerMate Simple Week last Thursday, you'd also be able to catch up to what we saw. So we talked about the most important principle in the theory of limit holding, which is information hiding. So information hiding is a necessity when you're playing against competent opponents, because revealing information about your strategy leads to you getting exploited, because people are now able to make less mistakes against your distribution. So we saw that you need to play in an unpredictable way. So we saw that it's when you play very predictably, when your strategy can be very predictable, that people reduce the mistakes that they make against you. And that's definitely something you want to avoid the most, right? Because if people are not making mistakes against you, how can you make money? So you cannot afford to play in very predictable ways if you're playing against competent thinking opponents. So we have to play in an unpredictable way. So what does unpredictable means? We saw that first thing, you need different hand classes. You can't afford to have just one hand class in your range, because that essentially means you're playing face up, as the expression goes. So imagine you only have nuts when you bet. Like, people don't need to see exactly what your cards you have. They don't need to see that you have ace of hearts, jack of clubs to know that you have a very strong hand. All that they know is that you have a very strong hand. They don't have any bluffs, and therefore they can make very few mistakes against your distribution. So first thing, you need different hand classes. We also saw that proportions matter. You cannot have any proportion of different hand classes in your range, because certain proportions still reveal too much information about your range. Then we answered the question that follows. What is the proportion that you need? Well, the proportion that you need is the proportion that generates indifference. So by generating indifference in your opponent's response, you guarantee that the Nash equilibrium principle cannot be violated. We saw that briefly, the definition from the Mathematics of Poker book, which states that an equilibrium is reached when neither player can improve their EV by changing only their strategy. Essentially means an equilibrium has been reached when neither player can make more money by deciding to play themselves only in a different way. So if you're making your opponent indifferent, well, you guarantee that that exact thing happens. So if your opponent's going to have the same EV with multiple options, then you guarantee that he cannot make more money by changing his strategy, and equilibrium has been reached. So that's what we saw in the past. Then I started some provocations here from certain assumptions that go through when we're talking about poker theory. Particularly when we talk about solvers and learn with solvers, we're going to see that there are two major assumptions at play when we consider solver strategies, equilibrium strategies. The first assumption is that your opponent is clairvoyant. And the second assumption is that your opponent is perfectly adaptable. I'm gonna go through this very quickly. You guys can rewatch this later if you want, but I want to be less theoretical and more practical in this call. So I'm going to go through this in a higher speed than last time, okay? But clairvoyance is the idea that your opponent knows your entire distribution, all the exact frequencies you play with every single hand in your range, every single spot. That's how the algorithm for solvers work. So when a solver is calculating the optimal strategies, it can do that because it knows the entire distribution of the other player in every single node, the description of the frequencies and range composition that the other player has in every single node of the game tree. That's clairvoyance. And there's also the element of perfect adaptiveness, means that the opponent can react immediately and perfectly to all your deviations that you ever try. If you ever try to play in a different way, the opponent immediately counters. Okay, so these are the assumptions that go through in a theoretical context, particularly in equilibrium context. Okay, so who is the guy that can be clairvoyant and perfectly adaptable? This guy is the nemesis. They're hide information against the nemesis. Okay, the nemesis is a definition that also comes from the mathematics of poker book. So Buchan describes the nemesis as a super opponent. So the super opponent is the nemesis. The nemesis always knows your strategy and always plays the maximum exploitative strategy against it. If you change your strategy, the nemesis changes instantly to counter. Always playing the strategy that maximally exploit yours. And then he gives the definition of an optimal strategy. An optimal strategy is the strategy that has maximum EV against the nemesis. So you guys have probably come across the definition before. Maybe it's the first time. But the idea is that, well, against the nemesis, there's only one thing you can do to maximize EV, which is to play GTO. So the GTO strategy is the strategy that maximizes EV against the nemesis. The super opponent that has clairvoyance over your distribution and is perfectly adaptable. However, one thing that we'll see immediately is that the nemesis doesn't exist, right? So the nemesis doesn't exist. This concept of the nemesis, the super opponent, is the personification of the mathematical concept of a maximally exploitative strategy, right? So you ain't playing against the nemesis when you're playing online poker or live poker, whatever poker format you want to play. You ain't really playing against the nemesis. You ain't playing against someone who has a clairvoyant view of your distributions and is perfectly adaptable, ready to counter in every single spot. You're playing against this guy. You're playing against a random dude in his bedroom, in front of his computer, eating Doritos. Now here, I actually wanted to make a picture of a guy eating Cheetos. That's the input I gave to Midjourney. This is a AI generated picture, but for some reason I'm still a big noob on Midjourney. He didn't understand Cheetos, so he built a Doritos picture. So you're playing against this guy. You're playing against this guy in his bedroom, eating Doritos, drinking a beer in front of his computer, scratching his ball sack. That's the guy you're playing against. You ain't playing against the nemesis. You're playing against this random dude. So GTO's strategy is not the highest EV strategy in real games, right? That might be obvious to many of you. That might be not so obvious to some of you. But the fact is, GTO's strategy is not the highest EV strategy in real games. Now, I need to make a disclaimer here. I'm not saying that GTO strategy is a bad strategy in real games. That's not true. In fact, I believe a perfect GTO player would be a big winner in real games. However, it is a fact that GTO strategy is not the highest EV strategy in real games. That's a fact. But it's still a good strategy. It should definitely be very winning in real games. But it's not the highest EV strategy. And, well, we're playing poker, and most of you here are either playing professionally or trying to play professionally. I would imagine you want the highest EV strategy, right? Not just a good strategy, you want the highest EV strategy. That's what I want for myself, at least, and what I try to teach to my students in metagame and all the private coaching students I've had over the years. What's the highest EV strategy? What's the strategy that can make the most money, right? That's really important to me. So to maximize EV, you need an exploitative strategy. You need a strategy that will deviate from GTO in a certain way in order to increase the value you can get from your opponent's strategies. That's what we're going to do, right? So if we had to give a simple answer to this question, what is it that exploitative strategies do? Try to give your answer in the chat. Well, what is it that exploitative strategies do? In fact, in simple terms, in practical terms, what do you think that does? Recognize opponent's mistakes in their strategy and deviate from optimal strategy to take advantage. Nice. Max value of weak lines of villain. Good. My partner Xingyong is here. He says, let's go. Thanks for being here, my friend. They maximize our EV against the imbalances of our opponents. Yes, that's definitely correct. Capture the most EV from a specific player. Use villains' non-optimal actions. Take notes of showdowns or data and adjust. Awesome. Realize more EV than GTO. And take advantage of leaks like overcall, overfold, overbluff. Awesome. Very, very good. You're all correct in some way or the other. I give my own simple definition here to what exploitative strategies do, which is that they leverage information advantage. So the idea of playing exploitatively is that you have some information about your opponent's distribution, and you can leverage that information to gain more money. So that's what we're going to be doing when we employ exploitative strategies. We have some information advantage because we observe people's behavior, and then we can leverage that to apply in counter strategies. So in theory, we talked about how we should hide information. But in practice, we're going to talk about how you should leverage information advantage instead. Now, what does that look like in practice? Well, the first thing you need to do is this. This is the first thing you need to do. You need to open your eyes. And that's something that, as simple as it sounds, not everyone does. Not everyone is willing to pay attention to all the information that is being revealed at the tables. And again, this is me trying to make a mid-journey prompt. I was trying to make someone in his computer with a blindfold. For some reason, Mid-Journey put that weird thing in that guy's face. But the idea here is that a lot of people refuse to try and find and accept the information that people reveal. There is this very big obsession with GTO and exploitable strategies in the poker community today. And I get that. I totally get that. And I don't want this class to come across as a anti-GTO class. That's not it. In fact, I love GTO strategies. I teach a lot of GTO strategies in my videos in my company. But there are a lot of people that refuse to even accept the fact that people have leaks, and they refuse the information that people give to them. So people are showing leaks all over the place in real games, and there are a lot of people that are just refusing that information, that are not willing to act upon that information or even to use it as part of their game plan, of their strategy. And my question to people like this is why? Why do you do that? Why are you willingly refuse to take in this information that people are revealing about their strategy to you? Because this is information you could be using to make more money. So the first thing you need to do is you need to open your eyes. This needs to be part of who you are as a poker player. So this is something deep. It's something like deep into your practical approach to the game. Is the fact that you're constantly looking for information that you can acquire. constantly looking for how people are revealing information about their strategies that you could use to your benefit. So this is something very, very deep about your approach as a poker player, your approach to the game. Right? So my question is, why? And then there can be many, many reasons why. So someone said that because they're not comfortable exposing themselves to be exploited. That's really good. We're going to talk about that in a future point of the call. But the idea here is that to maximize EV, you have a first job. Your first job is to gain information advantage. And you do that by observing people's behavior and researching people's behavior. So observing people's behavior is something really simple. As you're playing, you're observing how people play. What are their patterns? How are they constructing their ranges? What are their showdowns? You observe that. And the research part, I separated this because the research part is more something about the off-table work that you do in order to gain that information. Because yes, you can gain some information while you're playing, but the bulk of the information advantage you gain is when you research people's behavior. Because then you're going to have time to go deep on how they're revealing information about the distribution. When you're playing, you're going to have multiple tables, you're going to have multiple distractions. You have a constraint on the time you have to act, right? So you don't have infinite time to look for information to make a decision. So it's when you research people's behavior that you actually gain information advantage. You have to separate some time to actually research how people are actually playing. So this means things like frequencies, range compositions, bet sizing patterns, timing patterns, and a lot of other things that I could name here that will allow you to get some information about how people are constructing their ranges. So that's the first job. First job is to gain information advantage. The second job is to leverage that. So leveraging that is about finding the highest EV strategy with the information you gained and then executing it. So that's a very important two-step process because, well, you can't execute something you don't know. And if you know it but you don't execute, then it's also worthless. So first, you find what's the highest EV strategy, and then you execute it. Okay. Now, who can tell me how we can do that in practical terms? How do we do these two jobs of gaining information advantage and then leveraging it? How do we do it in practical terms? Or if someone already does it, how do you do it in practical terms? Hello from Lebanon. Hello, my friend. Marcelo said hand to node. Rishad had said math database analysis, study, MDA plus node lock, MDA and apply the counter at the tables. One way is to run solvers with node locks. Perfect. Very good. Eating Cheetos. Eating Cheetos. Flopzilla with opponents' ranges. Okay, someone old school here. That's good. I used Flopzilla in the beginning of my career. It was like 2016 that I used a little bit of Flopzilla. It was good. Nowadays, I believe most people are not using it anymore, but it was a good tool back in the day. Taking notes and adapt to villain. Very good as well. Paying attention at the very least, said Mark. Of course, right? So here I'm going to ask the help of my friend Jesse here. And we're going to use science. Science, bitch. The process that I'm going to show you here is a very systematical process that you can use to first find information and then leverage that information. That's the process I've been using in my career for the last 7 years, developing exploitative strategies. The process we use inside metagame with our students, and the process that I think everyone should use in order to develop accurate exploitative strategies that you can use in game and maximize UV against people. The first step, you need to determine what hiding information looks like. We remember that we talked about how in theory we're supposed to hide information, and it's very difficult for you to say that someone has a leak if you don't have something to compare it to. And what do you have to compare it to? You compare it to an exploitable behavior, to balanced behavior, GTO behavior. So at the very least, you need to have some basic notion of what GTO strategy looks like, what a balanced strategy looks like, an exploitable strategy looks like, because then you have something to compare what you see from your opponents. So without that, it gets really difficult. It's still possible because some behaviors are so obviously exploitable that you don't need necessarily to have something to compare to. But the first step is having a notion of the frequencies in range compositions of a balanced and exploitable player. So a description of a strategy is basically the frequencies of the range composition. So if you can have that, then you have an idea of, okay, this is what GTO looks like. This is what an exploitable behavior looks like. And then you can use that to compare with the second step, which is the information advantage you acquire. So you go out, you observe people's behavior, and you research people's behavior so that you can find the frequencies and range compositions of the real players in your games. So you're not playing the nemesis, you're playing against a guy eating Cheetos, scratching his ball sack in front of his computer. So you need to get into this guy's head. How does he think about poker? How does he construct his ranges? What is his idea of a good strategy? What are the heuristics that he has in mind to play the game? And what are his frequencies and range compositions? Because ultimately you need a picture of his strategy. And a picture of his strategy is frequencies and range compositions, right? And then lastly, you have leverage information advantage. So you build models that use that information that you gain to calculate counter strategies. So you need to use that information for something, and that something is building a exploitable strategy, an exploitative strategy that goes ahead and extracts EV from that gap. So it's a continuous process of gathering data, analyzing and comparing, calculating counter strategy, executing. That's a continuous process. You gather data, you analyze and compare, you calculate counter strategy, you execute. If you can do that, if you can really do that process continuously, consistently, gathering accurate data, analyzing and comparing systematically, building models that you can calculate counter strategies, then you can make profit. Then you can make a lot of profit, right? So we're going to take a look at what is an example of this in practice that you can see so that this all becomes more practical. Okay, so the example I separated for you guys here is investigating the delayed CBAT node. So imagine you want to improve, right? And a very good way to improve is by separating certain parts of the game tree for you to actively improve your strategy in that specific situation. And the most important situation for no limit holding, particularly 6 max cash, is single raised pot in position. That's the spot that contributes the most to your win rate. So it's a good idea you separate some time to improve in that particular spot. And one of the nodes you can study in single raised pot in position is at the late CBAT node. So I'm going to give an example here of what I would do if I were you to improve your execution on the spot and guarantee that you can maximize EV against your opponents. Okay, so the first thing that we saw is, well, let's determine what an exploitable behavior looks like. So here we're considering that we are the button. Okay, so we're always considering us as the aggressor, which means that the big blind is the caller. The big blind is the villain, the population, your opponents. So we need to determine what an exploitable behavior looks like first, so we have something to compare it later to how people are playing. And one way to do this is the way that I prefer nowadays. You guys have seen from my videos probably. If you haven't, you will know it now. I have a program that generates GTO hand histories. So I can programmatically put bots to play against each other, and this generates hand histories for me. And I can use it to study an exploitable behavior. I can see what the stats of GTO bot. So for this particular spot, for example, in this example we're seeing here, I decided to take a look at what would be the inexploitable behavior of someone facing a small delayed CBAT. So you see there on your screen, those are the stats that someone would need to run if they want to be unexploitable as the big blind facing a small delayed CBAT. So we see 40% fold versus small delay CBAT and 11% check raise facing the small delay CBAT. Now, the way to actually be extremely precise with this is by using aggregated reports. And you need to run it if you want to maximum precision. Okay, those are for the The nerds that need maximum precision, that they want the exact numbers, for maximum precision, you need to run Gator reports on all of the 1,755 strategically different boards. Because when you run bots against bots, no matter how big the sample you have, there's still variance in it, right? So here I have a sample of 100,000 hands. There's still going to be some variance in the sample because, maybe the big blind ran bad and just got bad hands and had to fold a lot of times, right? So there's going to be some card distribution, some run out distribution going on that is going to impact the frequencies. So the most precise possible way you can have is to run a Gator reports that you're going to have the exact frequencies. Okay, so the fold frequency you have there is 38% for all the boards. And the check raise frequency is about 10.5. That's roughly what you have there. So 38% on all board textures, 10.5% check raise. Okay. Everyone following here? Next step is, you need to find the frequencies and range compositions of the real players in your games. You need that information if you want to apply exploitative strategies. And then you do the same process, but now you're going to research the behavior of your opponents. So here's what I have for my own database. This is for 500 NL and above regulars. And we see here, this is how people actually play. They have 50% check fold and 9% check raise. 50% check fold, 9% check raise. This is how actually people play. So we have someone being unpolite here in the chat. Just took care of him. If you guys saw someone else being unpolite, just let me know. So this is how people actually play. They fold 50% of the time and they raise only 9% of the time. And then we can use that to build a counter strategy. We see that GTO folds 38%, regs are folding 50%. GTO check raises 10.5%, regs check raise 9%. So there's a huge gap here, 32% more folds and 14% less raises. That's when you do the third step of the process. You build models that use the information you just gained. You just gained a huge amount of information here, but if you don't act on it, then it's not going to make you any money. So you have here a gap of 32% more folds, 14% less raises. So how do you do that third step? You do it with the node locking function. If you have used POSolver before, you will see that it contains this function that allows you to adjust the strategy for any player in the game tree. And by adjusting the strategy of any player in the game tree, you can model your opponent's behavior. You can change how they play and then use the solver to calculate the counter strategy for you. That's exactly what you should do. That's exactly what I've been doing for the last 7 years in my life for all the lines that I think are relevant. So what would that look like for a real hand example? This is a random hand I took out of my database. And this was a ace 5-3 two-tone texture. I checked back the flop, and then my opponent checked to me on this 3 of hearts turn. And then I kept thinking, what should be my strategy for this particular node? Well, if you want to build your strategy with this process, you do everything we have been talking about so far. Here, you see that I jumped straight to how people are playing. So I went to hand to node, my database, and see, okay, how are people playing this spot when they face a small bet? I already knew that in typical texture, this is a typical texture where you're going to use a small size as the late C bet. So ace high boards are great for that. Pair turns are great for a small size. So I went straight and checked, okay, how people are actually playing the spot. How much are they folding when they face a small bet in this situation? And I saw this huge number. Flop ace high, 54% fold to small delay C bet. Turn paired, 54% fold to a small delay C bet. When you go and take a look at the solution, the GTO solution for this, you see that there's an 18% overfold. The actual GTO fold frequency for this spot is 36%. That's a crazy, crazy high deviation that people have here. And this, again, this is their stats for 500 NL plus regulars. I would imagine at low stakes, people are leaking even more than this. So you have an insane deviation here. Now, two reasons for this, as we're going to see. One first is that, of course, people are just going to fold hands that they should call. But another problem that a lot of people have is that they don't know how to construct the initial probe range, right? So when the big blind is there on the turn, he needs to construct a balanced checking range and a balanced betting range. And people really struggle with that. So what ends up happening very often is people will not check sufficiently amount of strong hands. So when they face a bet, they're naturally weaker and they have this insane deviation from the solver. So what you can do is you can do a node locked model. So here I have the print screen of the node locked model that I did to show you guys this process here. You have the overfolded region on the left. You see that pretty much the entire overfolding region are the offsuit broadways that need to be called. So you see the king high is getting folded. And the node lock function is very cool because you can just use a slider to increase the frequencies. And the algorithm automatically alters the strategy for the lowest EV hands. So if you increase the folding frequency, it'll automatically start folding more of the lowest EV hands that were supposed to be called at some frequency. So that way you're not making like any huge assumptions that, oh, people are gonna fold a 5 here. No, you're just adjusting the frequencies in the bottom of the range. Okay, so this is the node locked model. You see there 53% fold. I didn't even got to the 54% because that would involve folding hands I didn't think people actually get there with. And then you can go from this. This is the GTO strategy. You have 42% delay c-bet for the AP player with the small size with a 281.5 chip in EV. This is 10K NL structures. This is exactly as big blind per 100. So the EV here for the IP player is 281.5 big blind per 100. And if you allow the solver to adjust for the imbalance, you get to this. So you get now to, instead of 56% checks, you check only 28% of the time. You increase your EV by 12 big blinds per 100, and you have some very obvious changes in your strategy. You see first that air almost never checks. Now you're just delay c-betting most of your air hands. And an interesting effect is that some nutty hands start betting bigger, right? So you see, if you see the difference between the 3x region, so king 3, queen 3, ace king, ace queen, you see those hands now are shifting to a bigger size. Now that's also straightforward because we are assuming our opponents are not going to put too much money to the pot when you bet small. So there starts to be a discrepancy between the value of the small bet and the value of the big bet. If people are not going to put money into the pot when you bet small, then you're better put the money in yourself and size up. So this is the typical process you would use to improve your strategy in a particular node. You gather GTO information, you gather population information, you build a model, you see the model, and you apply the counter strategy. Now, is that all we can do? Is that all we can do to exploit someone overfolding to the lazy bets like we saw here? Or is there something else we can do? Who can give me some ideas? Can you use GTO Wizard AI not to do this? Captain Sparrow said not yet, but yeah, they will for sure implement that in the future. In fact, I believe it's already in the very soon part of them, or their implementation. Node blocks are flawed because real villains don't know they're being exploited. Well, depends. We're going to talk more about that. We can study how to counter this exploit for sure. Open wider pre, set our friend here, very interesting. we should locate where they put their strong hands and overfold there and attack elsewhere. Interesting. Change flop strategy to get to this node more often. Very good. Check back more to get into this overfold node more often. Very good, guys. You all have the correct ideas in mind here. So there's more we can do here. So there's more we can do because this node that has increased its EV, it increases the EV of the path that leads to this node, right? So that's why we call the game a game tree. So that it's literally a tree of decisions. So if you take a look at a flop situation where you have indifferent actions, so I try to give this visual representation here to you guys. See, there are two nodes with equal value, 8 chips. So if you have two nodes with equal value, 8 chips, you're going to be indifferent between the two. You're going to play a mixed strategy. And you see that the children nodes, they all sum up to the same value. So it's 3 and 5 on the left, and then 2 and 6 on the right. But then once you introduce a higher EV gain on some of the children nodes, now the parent node is higher EV, which means that you should play it more often, or for a max exploit strategy, you should play it all the time. So you're now no longer indifferent. So in this example, I just changed the leftmost node, the children node, from 3 to 3.5 to indicate an EV gain on a children node, which means that now the parent node is making 8.5 and you're no longer indifferent. So if you want to maximize the EV of your strategy, you should adjust your prior streets, the strategy on the previous streets. That's exactly what happens in a node lock model. Now, for this means you're seeing here, I use the tool that I have developed for myself. I call it a automatic node locker. I can just input assumptions for how I want any of the strategies to change, and then I can do it automatically for all the nodes that I want. Because node locking is a little bit painful to do it manually, because you can only do it one run out by one. There is a cool function in POSolver where it automatically adjusts strategically equivalent runouts. So let's say you have a two-tone board and the turn comes a suit that is not present on the flop. Both of the suits that are not present on the flop are strategically equivalent. So if you node lock one suit, POSolver automatically node locks the other suit, which is great. But still, it's a little bit painful if you want to study turn nodes, for example, which is 49 different runouts, right? But you see here that the GTO tree, the flop to bet strategy, is what you would expect: 40% C bets by the AP player, 60% checkbacks. If you're C betting range on this board texture, just because it says high, you should know you can't C bet too much on this board, as you can see. And then once we node lock villain to overfold all of the turn nodes to delay C bet, the imposition player starts checking back entire range. That's very interesting. That's very interesting. One thing that I have as a question here on the bottom left is, why check value though? Why is the solver checking value? Because we saw how, if people are overfolding to small bet, then maybe your strongest hands don't gain much value, right? All the other hands are going to gain value, but the strong hands are not gaining value. So why is the solver checking back value here as well? You can give me an idea. To protect your garbage delay C-bet range. No, because the data position player is locked, right? So data position player cannot react to your garbage delayed C-bet range. We are assuming that we are making the exploit, so the data position player is locked to overfold to our delay C-bet. Because our value becomes indifferent to betting and checking. Well, in this case, it didn't even become indifferent, right? It has become a pure strategy check. Because villain will probe too much value? No. A very important thing as well is to lock the other position player's checking range, because this is very important. In fact, if you're doing a node lock model and then node lock the other position player to overfold, but you don't lock the initial check, then all the solver is going to do is stop checking the hands that are going to fold a lot to stop leaking money. So the only way you can model someone to overfold the lazy bet is if you make sure that you also lock the checking range. because otherwise the solver would just adapt to that and make up for the overfolding mistake by not checking as many hands that would fold. We don't gain by folding bad hands. If OP overfold the nuts, maximize EV by letting opponent hit some garbage. Okay, not sure if I saw the answer I was looking for, but the idea here is that, and this is really important if you're doing node lock models, okay? When you node lock just one specific node, you should remember that all of the other nodes are unlocked, which means that the solver will always adjust to try to reduce the mistake it's making on that locked model. Okay, so if you node lock the turn, both players are unlocked on the flop and they're unlocked on the river, which means that imagine you play a c-bet strategy where you're just checking back all your trash because you're just going to delay c-bet because people overfold. Now, all of a sudden, you're just c-betting value hands, but then the OP player is not locked on the flop, so the OP player will exploit you on the flop. He will overfold to your flop c-bets, okay? Because you're just checking back trash, c-betting value, then you lose money with you. You can't gain value from your value bets because OP will overfold, okay? So we can do this, we can see this effect by locking the OP player to play the optimal flop strategy. Okay, so on the top, you have the GTO tree. That's the optimal flop c-bet strategy for the AP player. On the previous slide, you had Villain, the IP player, checking back entire range. And now on the bottom here, you have what happens with the c-bet strategy when you have the OP player overfolding turn, but you also have the OP player playing optimally on the flop, which means it's still calling, continuing raising with the appropriate hands at equilibrium. And now you see the c-bets go up, but you still see the effect of most of the air hands checking back, and now you see bet mostly good value hands. So this is the effect of leaving the OP unlocked on the flop or leaving the OP locked on the flop. If you can lock the OP player to be playing optimally on the flop, then you can see bet value and then check your air. That's roughly what's happening on the bottom tree. You can see that all of those hands like Jack 9 off, 10-8 off, 10-9 off, all checking back almost pure Queen 9 off type hands. You have a bunch of suited hands as well checking. And then you have also an effect of increased c-bet frequency of the value hands. So you see aces that was mixing on the top is now pure betting on the bottom. You have, what are the other strong hands? Pocket fives, which is mixing, is now pure betting on the bottom. Pocket threes, which was checking a little bit on the top, now it's pure betting on the bottom. Okay, so you have this effect of value hands betting slightly more often, particularly the strongest hands, and the air checking back. All right. Awesome. So let's continue. This is the process that you should do if you want to maximize your EV. If you want to maximize your EV, you have to determine what an exploitable behavior looks like. Then you determine what people actually play. Then you build models. Once you build that models, you should also consider how you can adjust the strategy of your previous streets to account for that mistake and really maximize your EV. So I have a real hand example here that I showed in one of my previous videos. It was I can't stop over bluffing video. Maybe I'll check that out. And the last hand of this video is me bluffing for a 2x pot bluff shove in a single raise pot in a bet line cut off versus big blind. So there comes this A3 deuce board. I bet big on the flop. I bet 2/3 on the turn. Villain calls twice. And then comes this 3 on the river. And I bluff for 2x pot on the river. In this hand, Villain ended up folding Jack 7 of hearts. You can see that in the video. And, well, I could feel very proud of my bluff, right? Oh my God, I'm so good. But this is not white magic, okay? This is not something just completely amazing or something that, I just, oh my God, I'm so good. No, it's just the same process. It's the same process that I've shown you guys here about how you can develop exploitative strategies. So the first thing that I do to determine how often I'm going to bluff in lines like this is I need to know how much GTO folds in this spot. So here I have an aggregator report for a similar sizing sequence to what I did in the hand. It's not exactly matching because I couldn't find an exactly matching report, but this is how much GTO folds to, after calling a small over bet on the flop, calling a 3/4 pot bet on the turn, and then facing a 1.7x all-in bet on the river. It's very small there, probably you can't see, but it's 65.22%. Okay, so this is how much GTO folds to this sequence, and this is across all board textures, all the 1,755 strategically different board textures. The next thing we need to determine how people actually play, right? Because there will probably be a gap between how people play and what optimal behavior looks like. So I go into hand to note. So I have the stat here for hand to note, how much people fold to a 2x bluff all in, the 2x bet all in on the river after calling a pot size bet on the flop. And you see the number there. It's probably not very good to see, but it's 72%. So you have an exploitable behavior 65 and you have population behavior 72%. We can use that information to build a model of our strategy. In this case, the river strategy, particularly with the bluffing hands, is very easy to model. It's a simple equation. So you can use the information to calculate what would be EV of bluffing in this spot. For this spot, we have roughly 40 big blinds on the river. You see here, it was 42 big blinds. So we're going to have roughly 40 big blinds on the river with the sizing sequence. And then you can build a model that calculates the EV of bluffing for each fold equity you can expect. So you have on the top 72%. That's the first data that we got for him to note. If people fold 72% to this sizing sequence, then I'm making 6.4 big blinds per 100, 6.5 big blinds per hand with my bluff. Okay, that's 6.5 big blinds every hand that I can bluff in this particular spot, given that they should fold 72%. Now, I included 70% and 69 because this is another very important thing about studying data in hand to note, which is that you cannot assume all of the hands in your range will be able to enjoy this fold equity because different hands have different blocker properties, and those blocker properties are going to have an impact on their fold equity. So I always want to be conservative with my models. I always want to assume that I'm going to have terrible blockers. So if I have terrible blockers, my fold equity is actually going to be lower than the fold equity I see in the data. So for this particular spot, I would assume something around 69%. I think a 3% margin to be conservative is a good idea because based on the test that I've done, this is the maximum effect you're going to get with bad blockers, a 3% lower fold equity because you have severely worse blockers than the other hands in your range. And then if I can have that, then I'm making 2.8 big blinds every time I bluff the spot. And there we have also the optimal fold equity, in which case I would be breaking even. So if my opponent would fold 66.7, then I would be breaking even on my bluff. Okay, in this spot, I do expect to have around 69% fold equity, which means I'm going to have roughly 2.8 big blinds per hand of EV with my bluff here. Now, we shouldn't stop there, right? We shouldn't stop there because the next step is we maximize our EV by choosing the path of the exploit more often. That's exactly what you should do when you can anticipate they can generate EV on the future streets. And if you take a look at a GTO tree, you'll see that it is not optimal for me to bluff that hand on the turn. But look at what happens with our turn c-bet strategy when we account for the river overfold. So I used again my automatic node locker here to put a 2% river overfold to the all-in bet. Okay, so that's what I inputted in the program, 2% overall overfold to the all-in 2x pot bet on the river. And that's how our turn strategy changed. It went from 38% double barrel to 71% double barrel, with my ace 5 becoming almost a pure bet. So that's how you maximize the Vivre strategy. You get a sense of how GTO plays. Then you get data on how people play. Then you go ahead and you build a model. Once you build a model, you consider how that should impact your strategy on the previous streets. And then you go ahead and you execute. That's how you do it. Now, the best example of this process I can give to you guys is big blind pre-flop ranges against recreationals. Because guess what? Pre-flop is not separate for the game tree. Unfortunately, we don't have a solver. Well, we do have it, but it's not practical. That solves from the pre-flop and forward. We have PO solver and other solvers that you input pre-flop ranges and then you solve from the post-flop. But pre-flop is part of the game tree. So against recreational players, for example, I will show you guys my ranges here. Recreational players, let's say you're in the big blind facing a recreational player on the button and they open. They actually open tighter in frequency than solver. They open about 37%. Solver is about 42 and something. And they also don't fold much to 3-bets. If you look at the data, recreational players fold about 30% to 3-bets only. But you should still 3-bet and call their opens wider than solver. And why that is? Because you have the same effect. So you have pre-flop, you have decision, call, fold, and raise, and then the children nodes are the post-flop nodes. But if you can expect people to make a lot of mistakes post-flop, this means that the EV of the children nodes has increased, which means that, of course, the EV of the parent nodes has increased. So you should adjust your pre-flop strategy to account for the mistakes that these people are making in the post-flop game tree. So you can even be very conservative with this. But for example, the top of your folding range is immediately going to become profitable. Take a look at a hand like King 7 off, big blind facing a button open. In optimal play, in optimal land, it loses 0.01 of a big blind per hand. So it loses one big blind every 100 hands calling. That's a very low loss rate there for King 7 off. It's very, very close. So if you can have all the CV coming from the mistakes of people post-flop, absolutely a hand like this will become a profitable defense for you. When it comes to constructing your 3-betting ranges, then you should be able to compare, and this is something I didn't say about this slide here. You see that on the right we have the raise, on the left we have the call. You see that there are more dollar signs on the children nodes for raising and lower dollar signs and less dollar signs for the children nodes of calling. Because based on my research about recreational player behavior post-flop, they make much higher mistakes, much bigger mistakes when in a 3-bet pot than in a single raised pot. So you can expect the mistake that they're going to make post-flop in 3-bet pots to be much more significant, which means that the EV gain you will have to play 3-bet pots against them will be higher than the EV gain you will have to play single raised pots. Although both are going to happen, you're going to have an EV game to play both. So you should expand your calling range, and it's very likely that the mixed strategies, call or raise, will likely become a pure raise, because then you can expect on future children nodes to have higher EV in playing 3-bet pots because of the mistakes that they make compared to single raised pots. So this is, for example, the big blind versus button range I personally play against recreationals and that I recommend to my students. You see 22% 3-bet percentage and only 45% fold percentage. That's 8% more than equilibrium for 3-bets and 11% less folds relative to solver as well. So you're going to be calling more often and you're going to be 3-betting more often. And this is what you should do. This is what you should do to maximize your EV against your opponents. You should use that process for every single spot against all the profiles you face. Now, it's this that at this point that I expect a certain resistance from some people, not necessarily resistance, but a problem, an issue, right? But I don't have all this data you have. I don't have the population data. I don't have the GTO data. I understand that. So I was in a very good mood when I made this presentation. So I separated for you guys here the most imbalanced zones in a limit hold'em. These are the most imbalanced zones you're going to be able to find in a limit hold'em. Okay, so this I'm already saving you all the trouble of doing all of this process and finding this information for yourself. You're welcome to do it. In fact, I recommend that you do it, because looking things with your own eyes and doing the process with your own hands and just hearing someone else saying it is very different. But here it is for you. And these are the most imbalanced zones, meaning I only put it here the ones that are going to generate you the most TV. Okay, that's how in a good mood I was when I make this presentation. So there's a massive overfolding on the raise where the lazy bet in all spots. That single raise pot, 3-bet pot, 4-bet pop, all formations, cutoff versus big blind, cutoff versus small blind, doesn't matter. Every single spot, people are not going to call enough. They're not going to raise enough for the lazy bet. That's why you're going to see in my play and explain videos, I constantly talking about how you should play that node very exploitatively. And it's crazy. Like, I've been talking about this for years, and even my students still struggle to be as aggressive as they should in this node. I don't know why, but it is a constant struggle to get people to play this node as aggressively as they should. In fact, I took out one slide that I had here, but I should have kept it, which maybe it's for the next presentation, which is the spotlight effect. Spotlight effect is the psychological effect of you thinking that people have eyes on you when they really don't. So when you play exploitative strategies, it feels uncomfortable because you know your entire distribution, right? And you can see that you're making this huge deviation. And perhaps if you have been studying a lot of theory, you feel bad about making that, oh my God, I'm deviating from solver so much here. I'm exposing myself here. But this is the spotlight effect. No one has clairvoyance over the distribution. No one knows the distributions you're playing. Of course, with time, they can get information about that, and we're going to talk about this. But it's not like you make one exploit and all of a sudden all the regs in your pool know that you're playing this super max exploit strategy. That's not how it works. We're going to talk about that more. Then you have under raising versus blocking bets on the river in all lines. This is a sick deviation that people have where they face a small bet, but they can't raise it enough relative to solver. It happens in all river lines. All river lines that I compare solver data to population data, where you'll see that happen. Then you have significant overbluffs and discontinued aggression lines. Like you say a discontinued aggression line, there will be an overbluff, but for wide formation spots. I'm talking particularly for button, small blind, big blind, where ranges are super wide. So you have these lines like bet check bet, call check bet, raise check bet, check call bet, check bet bet. You take a look at how much people bluff, you take a look how much they are allowed to bluff for that sizing, it's more than they should. So they have this deviation. You can make money off that deviation. You just have to build the model. Then go ahead, build the model. Then you have these big overfolds to river bets as well, particularly when facing big sizes in discontinued aggression lines. That's why you see my can't stop over bluffing video. And you're like, oh my God, Salo is crazy. What is he doing? I'm just executing the strategies that I have developed based on my process. That's it. That's just that. So there's big overfolds to river bets, particularly facing big size and discontinued regression lines. People are overfolding in average spots of the game tree. So if you can do all that, if you can do all of this, then you're going to make a lot of money. You're going to make a lot of money, and you're going to be able to enjoy that thing you've always wanted, right? I asked people in my YouTube, what's your biggest desire as a poker player? A lot of you answered to make a lot of money, but a lot of people also answered enjoy the freedom of it. And a lot of people that answered to make a lot of money answered that, and then in the comments said, I want to make more money because I want to have freedom. So this is what ultimately we want, right? We want to become crushers because we want to make more money. Because we can make more money, we can do more of the things that we want, and maybe we can spend more time doing other things. Or maybe we just want recognition in poker as well. We want to be recognized as great players. Well, that's how we do it, right? Well, not so much. Not so much. Not so much. There's a problem. What is the problem that I purposefully omitted so far? What is the problem that I purposefully omitted so far? Raymond Lee said, no. No, this was sounding so good, right? No. No limit hero side counter exploit. Mindset. Opponents can adjust. What else? Result oriented mindset. Counter exploits. We open ourselves to be exploited. We become somewhat exploitable. Awesome. That's it, guys. That's it. You guys know it. You guys know it. I know that this is a struggle. Every time I see someone talking about exploitative strategies, it's either one of the two. Either they love it and they want to do it, or they hesitate to do it because they're afraid of getting countered. And that's a true fear. Because exploitative strategies reveal information. Once you start exploiting other people, you become vulnerable, right? So it's not like I'm just gonna exploit people here all day for years, nothing's gonna happen to me. But you're not playing against dogs, right? You're not playing against, I don't know, turtles. You're playing against, you're not playing against the nemesis, but still that dude that is scratching his ball sack, he still has a brain inside his head, and he can make some math, right? Not some extreme math, but he can make some math. So you make yourself vulnerable. And there's a big problem with exploitative strategies, which is that the amount of money you can make by exploiting is always lower than the amount you can lose by getting countered. This is something really sick about exploitative play. You're all happy, like, oh, I'm going to fuck this guy up. And then if he counters you, you lose more money than you were gaining by exploiting him. That's the fucked up thing, right? That's the fucked up thing about exploitative strategies. It's risky. It's risky, man. I have a bunch of slides here to show you some numbers, but I think you guys don't necessarily need this. I just put some numbers on the screen here to show you guys this effect. This is for the classic polarizes bluff catcher toy game. You can do this for yourself to see the effect of this. So you can see the Vs for a GTO3. You have there 7.5 per AP, 2.5 per OP. For my tree here, I chose the pot as 10 chips, but you can do with whatever. It's just for you to see the effect of the counter exploitation. Then let's say you lock the opposition player to overfold, and then you see, I'm just going to overbluff here. You see, now I'm making more money. I'm making 8.75 chips now that I'm able to exploit these people here that are overfolding. But then all of a sudden, if they decide to counter you, you don't lose the 1.25 you're winning with your exploit. You lose 2.5. So that's a problem, right? That's a problem. So exploitative strategies come with this risk that if you get countered, you're going to lose more money than you were initially gaining with your exploit attempt. So that's a problem. So exploitative strategies, maximal exploitative strategies are not enough. We need something extra. We need something extra. I call this something extra to retain information advantage. So I'm trying to be consistent with the terms I've been using since the beginning. We talked about hiding information. So this is essentially the process of playing unexploitable strategies. You need to hide information from someone trying to fuck you up. Then we went to, okay, I can leverage information advantage. I can see that people are not playing optimally, that they're revealing information to me about their strategy, and I can leverage that. I can exploit people. But the problem is that once you do that, you become a little bit vulnerable, and there's an exchange of information. Like people reveal information to you by playing imbalanced, and then in the act of exploiting them, you're also revealing a lot of information, and you're revealing even more about you than they revealed about them in the beginning. So you need to come up with a way to retain that information advantage. You need to leverage, you need to exploit, but you also need to keep the upper hand. You also need to stay one step ahead. So effective exploits are exploits that make you money and also keep it. Because it's very easy to lose the money you have won by exploiting. So effective exploits are exploits that make you money, but also keep it. And that's when you have true profit. That's when you have true profit. When you can make money exploiting people, and then you get to keep it. You You don't make yourself vulnerable enough to the point that people are going to counter you and not only get back the money you want from them, but even more than the money you want from them. That's when you make true profit. Okay, so let's recap what we saw. We talked about how EV is generated. We talked about information hiding and how that's a necessity if you're playing against the nemesis. If you're playing against the nemesis, you better hide information. You have no other choice. You have to hide information against the nemesis. But there are two major assumptions there. The opponent is clairvoyant and perfectly adaptable. In that case, the only way you can do is you need to play in a way that generates indifference, because then you guarantee that the natural equilibrium principle cannot be violated. The GTO strategy is a strategy that maximizes EV against the nemesis. But the nemesis doesn't exist. It's a fictional character. It's a personification of a mathematical concept. You're not playing against the nemesis, you're playing against this guy. This random dude eating Doritos in his bedroom, scratching his ball sack, clicking some buttons. That's the guy you're playing against. To maximize EV, you need an exploitative strategy. How do you build an exploitative strategy? You gather data, you analyze and compare, you calculate counter strategy, you execute. That's how you do it. It's a systematical process. You gather data, you analyze and compare, you calculate counter strategy, you execute it. So we have a certain node you want to study. You gather the data on how GTO plays that node. Then you go out and research the population, how people are actually playing. Then you take that information. If there is a gap, right? If there is an existing gap, you model that information. And then you go from an unexploitable execution to an exploitative execution where you make more money. And not only you do that, but you adjust your strategy for prior streets, because now you have extra EV in a certain node, which increases the EV of previous nodes. So if you want to maximize your EV, you should go ahead and increase the frequency that you get to that node. And then you can make a profit. But then we saw that there's a problem. There's a problem. You make yourself vulnerable. You make yourself vulnerable, and it's even worse than being vulnerable. Like, you can lose. The money you can lose is higher than the money you want by exploiting. So that's a big problem. You need effective exploits. You need exploits that make money, but also keep your money. So today we covered this part of the equation, how to make money with exploits. The next class and final class, we'll cover how the fuck you're going to do to keep that money you won making those exploits. That's what I've been doing for the past 7 years. I've been playing exploitative strategies for 7 years. A lot of times, max exploitative strategies. Other times, some different other types of exploits. And we're going to cover that next week. If you can do all that, if you can make money exploiting people and keep it, then you become this guy. Then you become king. You become the best player of your limit. You can play any game. If you can exploit people and keep the money you're making while exploiting, then you become this guy. So this will be the topic of our last and final class, how EV is retained. This will be the last class of the PokeMade Simple Week. I strongly recommend that you be there for this class. This will be this Thursday, September 7th, 6 p.m. GMT, same time. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed this class. I hope you enjoyed all the concepts. I'm really looking forward to closing this up in our next class, how EV is retained, this Thursday, 6 p.m. for our final class. All right, my friends. All right, that's it. Bye-bye. See you on Thursday. Don't miss it, guys. Don't miss it. Bye-bye.